After studying this module, you shall be able to know what military psychology is, understand how psychological tests can be applied in the military and civil services, know the important tests used to assess psychological profile of candidates in the military and civil services, understand the thematic apperception test and its applications. From the last 8 decades, psychological assessments have been an integral part of military and civil services. The history dates back to World War I, when screening of US military servicemen was first started based on psychological attributes of a person. The tradition to recruit military on the basis of psychological testing continued thereafter, and careful evaluation of psychological and psychiatric qualification was sustained at the time of World War II as well. Psychology found a place in the military efforts in the form of application of scientific principles to the selection of military personnel. Psychological tests of military and civil services have been adapted in novel ways to fit the cultural background of different countries. Selection of officers may be done through techniques like interview, group and individual testing, and psychological techniques. This module aims at looking at different applications of psychological testing in the military and civil services. Military psychology. Military psychology is defined as the application of psychological principles and theories to military context. It is a broad, specialized and complex field where knowledge from different branches of psychology converges. Military psychology derives its strength from its multidisciplinary nature and character. Often parallels are drawn between method and subject matter of sports, police, and military psychology. The ultimate aim of military organization is to achieve maximum defense effectiveness. This cannot be achieved by ensuring induction of effective and efficient manpower only. Ensuring satisfaction of individual needs has become as important as attainment of organizational goals in the face of changing social milieu and resultant societal transformation. Military is a very big and complex organizational structure characterized by complex structure, several subunits, diverse functions and activities, many job routes, and many employees. Military psychology is relatively a recent development in the Indian setting. Psychology as modern scientific discipline began in India with setting up of Department of Psychology in Calcutta University in 1915. Military psychology has unlimited avenues to grow in India. There has been no dearth of financial and intellectual resources for discipline of military psychology. Military psychologists served armed forces by testing trainees and workers on intelligence and aptitude. They also involved in designing and imparting military specialized behavioral trainings to the recruits. An important component of testing focuses on recognizing and ideally preparing officers and leaders as a future resource for nation, a work that is considered not just scientific but an art in its manifestation. Assessment tools in civil services and military. Selection of officers and men for the armed forces is one of the major responsibilities of military psychologists. The responsibilities include deciding upon the qualities to be assessed before beginning the actual selection process, job analyses for the officers and the other ranks of all the services. Assessors effectively apply the psychological technique of selection by using psychological tests used for personnel selection and validating them on the population in consideration. Various researchers have worked in the field of military psychology, and significant research has been done in the domains of intelligence and personality measurement, especially through projective techniques in the field of psychological testing in military and civil services. Many tests have been designed, such as Thematic Apperception Test (TAT), Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery (ASVAB), Armed Forces Qualification Test (AFQT), CAB Comprehensive Ability Battery, which will be discussed briefly. Thematic Apperception Test (TAT). The TAT was devised by an American psychologist, Henry Murray, based on a theory of personality that spoke about motives and needs. According to Murray, a need is a potentiality or readiness to respond in a certain way under given circumstances. Personality, shaped by needs and motives, reflects behaviors that emerge due to deprivation of those needs. It is to be noted that while a few needs are brief and changing, different needs are all the more profoundly situated in our temperament. As indicated by Murray, these psychogenic needs work mainly at the unconscious level and play a major factor in defining our personality. Murray explained that an underlying need or motive of a person can be identified in personality through the end results of his or her behavior, pattern and mode of behavior that he or she shows, the response and attention that a person gives to a particular stimulus, the way a feeling or an emotion is exhibited, and the manifestation of satisfaction or frustration when a particular result is attained or not. Besides, personal subjective scripts related to feelings, intentions, and goals also report an underlying need or motive of a person as stated by Hall and Lindsay in 1970. Murray in his writings has documented two types of needs. First, primary needs. These are those needs that emerge due to biological and physiological demands of a person. This includes the need for oxygen, food, water, protection of environment, etc. Second are the secondary needs. The second category of needs comprises of psychological wishes, that is, desires and requirements that a person has. This may include a need for nurturing, independence, affiliation, power, and achievement, etc. Let us know what these certain needs are. Need for abasement. This comprises of to submit latently to outer power, to acknowledge harm, accuse, feedback, discipline to surrender, to end up surrender to destiny, to concede mediocrity, blunder, wrongdoing, or annihilation, to admit and give penance to fault, disparage or damage the self, to look for and appreciate torment, discipline, disease, and adversity. Need for achievement. This means to perform something troublesome, to ace, control, or sort out physical articles, individuals, or thoughts. To do this as quickly and as autonomously as could be expected under the circumstances, to overcome obstructions and high and elevated expectation, to exceed expectations oneself, to equal and surpass others, to build self-respect by effective activity of ability. Need for aggression. This includes to overcome resistance mightily, to battle, to vindicate a harm, to assault, harm or murder another, to restrict strongly or rebuff another. Need for autonomy. Autonomy is to get free, shake off limitation, break out of imprisonment, to oppose intimidation and confinement, to evade or quit exercises recommended by overbearing powers, to be autonomous and allowed to act as indicated by drive, to be unattached, unreliable, to resist tradition. Need for counteraction. Counteract is to ace or compensate for a disappointment by retrieving, to destroy a mortification by continued activity, to overcome shortcomings, to curb apprehension, to destroy a shame by activity, to hunt down snags and troubles to succeed, to keep up dignity and pride on an abnormal state. Need for defendants. This means to guard the self against strike, feedback and fault, to cover or legitimize an offense, disappointment or mortification, to vindicate the inner self. Need for deference. This includes to appreciate and bolster a prevalent, to acclaim respect or praise, to yield energetically to the impact of a partnered other, to adjust to custom. Need for dominance. Dominance is to control one's human surroundings, to impact or direct the conduct of others by proposal, influence or charge, to discourage, limit or restrict. Need for exhibition. To exhibit is to make an impression, to be seen and listened, to energize, astonish, entrance, divert, stun, interest, delight or allure other. Need for harm avoidance. This means to evade torment, physical damage, ailment and passing, to escape from a risky circumstance, to take preparatory measures. Need for infa avoidance. This includes to dodge mortification, to stop humiliating circumstances, or to maintain a strategic distance from conditions that may prompt belittlement, hatred, criticism, or lack of concern of others, to avoid activity in view of the trepidation of disappointment. Need for nurturance. Nurturance is to give sensitivity and satisfy the needs of a powerless article, a baby, or any item that is frail, handicapped, drained, unpracticed, decrepit, crushed, embarrassed, forlorn, sad, wiped out, rationally confounded, to help an article in threat, to bolster, assist, support with reassuring, ensure, solace, attended, mend. Need for order. This means to place things all together to accomplish cleanliness, plan, association, parity, tidiness, neatness and exactness. Need for play. This includes to represent fun without further reason, to like, to snicker and make jokes, to look for charming response of anxiety, to take an interest in diversion, games, moving, drinking, gatherings, cards, etc. Need for rejection. This comprises of need to independent oneself from an adversely appended item, to bar, relinquish, remove or stay unconcerned with a second-rate thing, forsake an article. Need for sentience. This means to look for and appreciate sensuous impressions. Need for sex. This means to shape and further an erogenous relationship, to have sex. Need for succurrence. This means to have one's requirements delighted by the thoughtful guide of an associated article, to be nursed, bolstered, maintained, encompassed, defender, to dependably have a supporter. Need for understanding. Need to understand is to ask or answer general inquiries, to be keen on hypothesis, to conjecture, plan, examine and sum up. The thematic apperception test, a projective technique of personality testing, was developed by Christiana Morgan and Henry Murray in the 1930s at the Harvard Psychological Clinic. It is used to study sex, aggression, attitudes towards labor problems and authority. The place of conduction of TAT should be a quiet room without disruptions, disturbances and interference. The test taker, who generally is a trained professional, shows series of stories cards to the subject. The full set contains 31 cards in all. The scoring system for TAT, originally devised by Murray, is time consuming and unwisely. As a result, has been little used by later interpretations. TAT does not have normative scoring system for responses. In interpreting responses of TAT, examiners typically focus their attention on three areas: the content of story that subject narrates, feeling or tone of story, and the subject behavior apart from the responses. TAT is better situated to ideographic, which is evaluate unique features of subject view, than normathetic, that is to establish norms for answers from subject's interpretation. Illustration. Let us look at a story to understand the interpretation of TAT. Jeffrey worked as a window cleaner at the Canadian National Tower. One of the tallest buildings in the world, the Canadian National Tower was like a mammoth in front of an ant. One day, Jeffrey was working on the 60th floor of the building. Work was almost done when disaster struck. One of the ropes that kept that platform that he worked on safe and in place snapped. And in the flash of a second, Jeffrey was plummeting 60 stories down to the hard concrete path below with his life flashing before his eyes. Jeffrey tried desperately to grab onto a rope. Finally, around the 8th floor, he grabs hold of a rope. The pressure of the body on the rope weakens it and breaks it, and Jeffrey starts falling down. And just when he is about to hit the hard ground down below, he snaps out of the hypnosis he was in, and then the rope snaps. The interpretation. Premonition about his accident in which his death is the end result. However, to keep the suspense of story, he leaves the end hanging. Feels that premonition is a reality and many people do have them. He likes the idea of premonition. Many people have saved themselves from disasters because of premonition, like the example of the 9/11 attacks. Usually occurs in dreams. Let's look at another story. After working outstation for a month, the husband returned late in the night. He rang the bell the 3rd time, then the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and then lost his patience, went to the backyard of his house, broke open the door and entered the house. Fuming, he walked upstairs to his bedroom. He opened the door and saw his wife lying on the bed, scarcely breathing. Her skin had turned blue due to lack of air, her face flushed of its entire color. She takes her last breath after looking at her husband for the last time, looking like she was trying to keep herself alive, just to look at him for the last time. He looks over her body, and starts weeping, screams out loud, and suddenly wakes up from his sleep, panting and heaving. He drank a glass of water, walked to his window, then turns around and walks to his wife's side, kisses her on her head, and goes back to sleep. Let's look at the interpretation of this story. First, he made it up himself. Second, like stories where you manage to escape something bad that is happening, when pointed out that in the first story the person had not been able to escape, he said that he had the premonition he could have saved himself. An observation from both the stories is that both the events have occurred at an unconscious level. From the stories given by the subject, it can be observed that the motivating needs in his case are need for exhibition, need for abasement, need for affiliation, and need for nurturance. The first two needs can be seen in both the stories, and the latter two come out strongly in the second story. From his remarks, it can be clearly seen that he has a tendency to submit passively to external forces and resigns to his fate. At the same time, a slight tendency to counteraction can also be observed when he gives himself a second chance to correct the wrong by indicating that the pain has occurred in his dreams. The need for nurturance and affiliation can be very clearly seen in the relationship indicated between the husband and wife in the second story. The need for exhibition can be observed in the way he has formulated his stories, giving both of them a dramatic end. Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery, or the ASVAB. The ASVAB is a multiple aptitude battery that measures developed abilities and help predict future academics and occupational success in military. The ASVAB is a series of tests developed by Department of Defense and used by US Army to determine whether you have a mental aptitude to enlist and is valid for 2 years. The ASVAB may be used as a computerized version at MEPS, that is the Military Entrance Processing Station, or in a paper version of various MET, which is military entrance test sites around country or high school and college. The ASVAB comprises of following 8 individual subtests, including general science, arithmetic reasoning, word knowledge, paragraph comprehension. The 3 composite scores that determine career assessment are verbal skills, math skills, and science and technical skills. Armed Forces Qualification Test, or the AFQT. The AFQT score is most important ASVAB score because it determines if one can enlist in the US Army. The Armed Forces Qualification Test comprises of 4 subtests: word knowledge, paragraph comprehension, arithmetic reasoning, and mathematics knowledge. These subtests have been taken from the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, which we've already talked about. The scores obtained on these 4 subtests make up the military entrance score, or the AFQT score. The AFQT score forms the basis of eligibility criteria for taking entry into the armed services. The same score is used as a standard to assess the training potential of a personnel in the military services. Mathematical calculation of the AFQT score is done by the following steps. The combined scores on word knowledge and paragraph comprehension make a composite score known as the verbal ability, or VE. The verbal ability score is added twice to the scores for math knowledge, which is MK, and arithmetic reasoning, AR. So mathematically this is computed as AFQT is equal to 2VE plus MK plus AR, where VE is verbal ability, MK is math knowledge, and AR is arithmetic reasoning. The eligibility of personnel is determined by converting his AFQT raw score into a percentile score. This percentile score is compared to the scores on a standardized national sample of other test takers aged 18 to 23 years. The percentile scores tells an applicant how well he has scored contrasted with the other test takers. AFQT scores are positioned in categories. AFQT category represents to the individuals who are above normal in trainability, and category 5 represents to the individuals who are greatly low in trainability. People scoring in category 5 are by and large not allowed passage into the military. For category 1, the percentile score ranges are 93 to 99, for category 2, 65 to 92, category 3A, 50 to 64, category 3B, 31 to 49, category 4, 10 to 30, and category 5, 1 to 9 percentile scores. The Comprehensive Ability Battery, or CAB. The CAB, developed by Hackstein and Cattell in 1975, comprises of a total of 20 relatively short primary ability tests, with each item having a working test of about 5 to 7 minutes. The CAB is based on Cattell's work in establishing Horn-Cattell theory of fluid and crystallized abilities. The development of the CAB started in 1971, and it took about 4 years till the initial items content, test reliability, and validity of the battery, including the replication of the factor structure, was established. The tests in the CAB primarily measure an ability factor, which is known to be associated with job requirements of industry and organizational settings and career and vocational counseling. The tests are used individually or in various combinations for recruitment, selection, job placements, and career development and counseling. Scales of CAB. Battery 1 includes verbal ability, numerical ability, spatial ability, and perceptual completion. Battery 2 consists of clerical speed and accuracy, reasoning, hidden shapes, rote memory, and mathematical knowledge. Battery 3 and 4 comprise of meaningful memory, memory span which requires audio cassette, spelling, auditory ability requires audio cassettes, and aesthetic judgment. Battery 5 includes organizing ideas, production of ideas, verbal fluency, originality, tracking, and drawing. Another test used in military services is the Rotter's Incomplete Sentence Blank. The Rotter's Incomplete Sentences Blank was developed by Julian Rotter. The test has parallel 3 forms which are meant for different age groups. The test consists of 40 incomplete sentences which are 1 to 2 words long, such as I feel, I regret, etc. The subject is expected to complete the sentence according to his own wish or understanding. Its goal was to give an assessment method which could be utilized impartially to screen and test a person, and in addition to get specific diagnosis for treatment purposes. Examples of some of the sentences in the Rotter sentence completion stems are, if only I could, and the individual could complete it by saying feel relaxed and composed. People I know are ready to cheat you anytime. These completions are then scored by comparing them against typical items in empirically derived scoring manuals for men and women both, and by assigning to each response a scale value from 0 to 6. The aggregate score is an index of maladjustment. The major advantage of Rotter's Incomplete Sentence Blank test is the freedom of response. The test takers are not forced to reply in objectively defined categories to the question. Instead, subjects are free to complete the stems with nothing being labeled to be good or bad answer, or a high score or a low score answer. In this way, the subject comes close to the responses which are apparent in his life. Further, Rotter's test is applicable to both individualistic and group settings. Any number of group size can be chosen for conduction of the test with no known loss of apparent validity of the test. The interpretation of the sentences is done based on test takers' clinical experience and the knowledge of theoretical perspectives and psychodynamic theories of personality on which the test is based. The test is to a great degree adaptable in that new sentence beginnings can be developed or appropriately customized for a variety of settings, including clinical, applied, counseling, experimental, and many others. Summary. Military psychology is a broad, specialized, and complex field where knowledge from different branches of psychology converges and is applied to the military setting. The psychological tests used for testing in civil services or military settings aim at assessing the psychological profile of the applicant, such as his personality, intelligence, aptitude, ability, etc. Based on various researches in the field of military psychologies, a number of tests have been identified, such as the thematic apperception test, Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery, the Armed Forces Qualification Test, CAB, as significant psychological tests to be used for selection of officers and other ranks. The thematic apperception test is a projective technique of personality testing developed by Christiana Morgan and Henry Murray in the 1930s. The Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery is a series of tests developed by Department of Defense and used by the US Army to determine whether a candidate has the mental aptitude to enlist in the military and civil services.